The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom, where we look at pop culture iconic moments in movies, TV, and books over the years, and then decide whether or not there's personal injury cases based on what's happened in the medium. I'm Matt Hardin.
And I'm William Mayfield. And today we're going to be doing part 2 on Caddyshack, the movie. This scene that we're going to be doing is where Judge Smales is very proud. He is christening his brand new sailboat. He has an audience for whatever reason, expects them to care about his sailboat, and it does not go as planned.
Well, the sailboat's a flying wasp that we're looking at here, and the scene starts essentially with his wife, or Pookie, as he calls her, christening the boat with a bottle of wine, and she breaks off a piece of wood on the front of the boat.
I've got to say, Pookie has become a recent part of pop culture. You got to wonder if maybe this was the first time anyone talked about Pookie. So I don't know. It's not necessarily our department, but it made me curious.
That was my father-in-law's childhood nickname for my wife, so I think it probably goes way back.
Well, it's come back around, as many things do. But in this scene, as we talked about, Judge Smales is christening his boat, and his not-so-good friend, Al Czervik, who he's had a built-up rivalry with in this movie. Al Czervik's played by Rodney Dangerfield. Al Czervik sees him from afar in his boisterous way. He goes, "I've got to go over there." So he goes, and he takes the keys from the captain and starts driving the boat.
Well, and to set it up a little more, Al Czervik is a guy that builds condominiums. He's a visitor to Bushwood throughout this movie. He's the nouveau riche guy in there, the guy that's new to money that Judge Smales kind of looks down on. And frankly, every time Rodney Dangerfield sees Judge Smales in this movie, he's messing with him one way or another.
It definitely seems like Al Czervik doesn't necessarily dislike Judge Smales, but he likes to have fun with him, and he's aware of kind of the old money, new money rivalry, which is kind of a classic tale in clubs like this. So Al Czervik takes the keys, and the guy who looks a lot like Bob Odenkirk but isn't Bob Odenkirk was the captain, and he pushes him aside, and all of a sudden he starts going much faster than the boat was going before in a no-wake zone. So that's kind of our first sign of trouble.
So the guy that he thinks looks like Bob Odenkirk looks like he's probably mid to late 40s in this film, and so he's either somewhere approaching his 90s or no longer with us. This movie came out in 1980.
I don't think it's Bob Odenkirk, but it looks a lot like him. So Al Czervik starts driving the boat, and there are really 3 or 4 big incidences where a lawsuit would probably arise. The first one that comes to mind is he drives his boat past a fisherman, and a fisherman casts his line out, and miraculously the line gets caught on Al Czervik's boat. They show this very scripted looking jump into the water, and he holds on to the fishing pole, and you can see him being dragged through the water. There's a sailboat crossing that looks like it may or may not have hit this person. So
I think he's dead. So, I mean, I have a boat, which we have lots of fun with in my family. William's come out on it quite a bit with us. That's a no-wake zone. If anybody doesn't boat, won't know what that means. But, you're going like 4 miles an hour is what you should be. Rodney Dangerfield in this scene is easily going 30 or 40 miles an hour in a heavily congested area where there's airplanes, there's sailboats, there's wave runners, there's people everywhere. Highly, highly dangerous, frankly. Anyways, the fisherman get on the side, doesn't let go, which is anybody's ever tried to teach a kid to water ski. That's, a problem. They just hold on and drag themselves in the water. Well, this guy has no life jacket on. The hook gets on the boat. He's dragging. The water's, going feet up into his face. That sailboat crosses over. In the next scene, you never see him again. They come back by that boat, by Judge Smales' boat multiple times. Rodney Dangerfield is very erratically driving through. I think he may be dead.
One of the great cliffhangers in the history of cinema, indeed, is whether this random guy and fisherman in Caddyshack is still with us.
William is I think not appreciating my wonderful logic, having watched this scene 3 or 4 times.
I'm just a skeptic. So I will say, I want to pause on this one because I did find a couple of things interesting. Obviously, Rodney Dangerfield's character, Al Czervik, is negligent here. I mean, he's doing all sorts of things that reasonable people should know not to do. He owes a duty to everyone around him to be safe. I don't think it's fairly self-explanatory. But there are three things that the fisherman does. Let's say that he died, or let's say that he had something really bad happen to him that could result in maybe him getting apportionment of fault. Well, once you see Rodney Dangerfield's character in that boat going really quickly, reasonable people would get out of the way. Instead, this guy, it's almost like he didn't even see the boat, even though they're like a foot apart. And it's whizzing right by him, and he just throws his line out anyway.
His boat's docked in this scene. It's not moving. He's facing the opposite direction, and you have no expectation that somebody's going to come flying by you at 40 miles an hour if you're fishing in a marina. A lot of people like to fish in marinas because the fish, for safety reasons, with all the boats going on, like to go up under docks. And so, I mean, like our marina, people fish there all the time.
And I know you like to make deductions about this guy, like that he's no longer with us, but I didn't recall seeing him being blind. I don't recall seeing him being deaf. How did he not notice this boat whizzing by him, and he just kept on fishing as if nothing was going on?
Well, he's facing the opposite direction, and Rodney Dangerfield is coming from his periphery at a very, very high speed. So I don't know. I just think we need to take this guy's death just a little bit more seriously.
Plaintiff lawyer at work right there. So number two, he somehow hooks the boat, and they freeze frame, and it's just like hooks on there perfectly. And instead of letting the fishing rod go, he hangs on, goes out into the water, and then proceeds to hang on for 20 feet or so.
He caught a monster. I mean, that's the biggest thing he's ever caught.
And so I think as a defense lawyer, I'm not a defense lawyer, but if I was a defense lawyer, I would argue that any damages that would have resulted have been made much worse by this fisherman not taking reasonable actions.
I think any way you look at it, Rodney Dangerfield's going to get over that 50% magic level of fault over who caused this poor man's death
we
or
agree.
major injuries at least.
We agree there. I just think that there's a chance that the damages are going to be minimized because the third thing is he's not wearing a life jacket.
Why would he be? He's on a stationary boat fishing. So, I mean, I don't think that's that unusual. I don't think there's an expectation for an adult to be wearing a life jacket on a boat that's anchored at a marina.
So you'll see there, it's certainly up for debate. It's not up for debate who's mostly at fault for this. It's clearly Al Czervik. But things are not always as simple as they seem. That guy is certainly an innocent bystander here to an extent, but there are things that he could have done to mitigate the damages.
I'll say a couple other things. Sometimes the fishing poles are attached to you when you're fishing. They get attached to the boats. If you're trying to catch really big things, this movie is filmed down near Fort Lauderdale. So, I mean, if that's brackish water off a bay or something, there could be really big things in there. So, I mean, there's some things we don't know, even though they're pretending it's the Midwest. It's really, southern Florida. The other thing I'll say is it appears that most of the people on Rodney Dangerfield's boat are drinking. And given that this is like 1980 and it's a different time as far as people were thinking about drinking and either driving or, in this case, boating, I think there's likely alcohol involved in this. And I think if you take Rodney Dangerfield's blood or make him do a breathalyzer, I think watch out, because if there's alcohol involved, he's going to get nailed in this case.
Absolutely. And I want to take this opportunity to talk about a principle that I don't think we've talked about on the podcast yet, which is called mitigating damages. So when someone gets injured or hurt, there's a chance that they might be left in a position, let's say they have a really physically demanding job, that they might be left in a position where the job that they currently do is not possible for them given the new condition that they're in. Let's say that they have a really physical, laborious job and they hurt their shoulder, they can't move around like they used to. Well, Matt, can they just not work forever and they get paid for that?
Absolutely not. You've got to make the best of things. And I think not only as a legal principle, but juries typically are going to reward people with better verdicts. Insurance companies are going to pay more on cases where somebody has made the best of the bad or horrible situation they're in. Now, this particular guy, he's on a giant boat himself. He probably has a good job, but it's probably a desk job. And if he's not dead, rest in peace, he's probably going to have some trouble doing his job going forward for a while at least.
Absolutely. And so
shoot, he might have drowned. Let alone get hit by the sailboat.
So let's say again that this innocent character in Caddyshack is not dead. If he had to take a lesser job, let's say that he made X amount of money and now he makes half of that, you could claim the difference in the money he makes now and the money he made then as part of your lawsuit. But the problem in this scenario, he's not in a position where he can't work at all. He's just going to have to find something different. So you have a duty to mitigate your damages as best as possible. And so that's a principle we haven't addressed yet on the podcast, but it was a good opportunity to do so.
Well, I'll add one thing to that. I mean, mitigating your damages and making the best of it is very, very important to have your case have the best value it can have. The people that really get themselves in trouble are the ones that pretend to be more injured than they should be. You know, the person that goes in and testifies at their deposition that they can't move and can't do their job, and then a private investigator sent after them, and you get video back of them, you know, going over a jump through a flaming hoop on water skis or something. So as long as you're honest and straightforward and make the best of things, your case is going to have the best possible result.
A good rule of thumb: listen to your doctors, do what they say. They're medical professionals. They've been trained to assess whatever you have going wrong with you, and they should be able to assess what you can or can't do.
And be honest, frankly. So there's a bunch of other stuff that goes on in this particular scene. There's an airplane that goes over him. There's what appear to be 4 stunt boats that he goes by. But I think the next thing that happens is a second fisherman who's then in what I'd call a little dinghy or something, or what looks like a rowboat with a motor on it, fishing. And what happens then?
Well, he looks very shocked as he sees the boat approaching, as he should, because there's really shouldn't be any expectation that this is happening in a no-wake zone. And he does what we talked about earlier. I don't know that he necessarily would have the duty to, but he jumps off the boat. His boat is destroyed. His fishing day is ruined. Maybe he's a fisherman. Maybe he sells fish to local eatery and they sell it. So maybe he's lost out on some money for that.
I mean, it literally tears his boat in half. They show him going down one side of Rodney Dangerfield's boat, and we don't really see what happens to them either, other than it comes really close to the back of the boat where the prop is, you know, the propeller on the back of the boat, which frankly ends up causing more injuries and boating crashes than about anything else. I mean, you can get grievously injured. You could lose limbs from that. Everybody's heard of DUI or driving under the influence, but boating under the influence also has very, very egregious things happen due to people making poor decisions on driving a boat while drinking. We don't really know what happens to this guy. We don't know if he's the second fatality from this, but it appears he's a little bit apart from where the boat is. So
we should do like a small giveaway for if anyone can find anywhere on the internet that has it confirmed that any fatalities to human beings, not gophers, not occurred in the movie Caddyshack.
Well, our friend the gopher lives through the bombing at the end. Let's remember he's just fine.
Okay. I don't know if it's a continuity error, just a logic error, plot hole. Why were these stunt boat guys that appeared to be dressed like Evel Knievel and these jet ski guys, they show these waves knocking those people off, but they were going fast too.
In the no wake zone as well. And they're the old school, like stand up jet skis. I don't know if you've ever been on one of those things, but they're very difficult to stay up on. They're not like the modern one where you're just basically sitting on a mini boat and driving around. The ones that the stand up ones take quite a bit of energy to even stay up on them. And they've at least 3 of those people, flail off of the thing as his boat comes through. It doesn't really appear that those folks are probably injured, but potentially could be.
That's one where I would argue, though, that they might have a hard time getting past the modified 50-50 fault line, because if they're going fast through a no-wake zone and Czervik is going fast through a no-wake zone and he just happens to win because he has the better, more stable boat, I mean, who's really more wrong there if they're doing the same thing wrong?
Well, and these new wave runners, some of them will go up to 70 miles an hour, and there's very serious injuries happen. You get on these boats, people don't see the wave runners. They don't maneuver around them very well, and especially at marinas where they allow folks with zero experience just to rent these. Go rent a pontoon boat or something. They're just often are not safe around other boats.
So I believe that the next thing that happens, I don't know if it was a wave or if it was contact, but there was a reception of some sort, and there were a lot of people gathered on a balcony of sorts, and there were some musical instruments or whatnot, and that thing just topples, and
So
a
I think
whole
it's
party of people goes into the water along with some instruments.
I think it's like a floating dock where they're having a reception. But if you look at it, there's a couple of musicians on this thing. There's a stand-up upright piano on this thing that falls in the water. At least 8 or 10 people are going in the water. And they're all fully clothed, and even being in the water with clothes on is a major problem. If that band had a microphone and it was hard to tell whether they did or not, electricity, the current will go right through the water. That's why you often see at marinas don't swim near here, because you got to worry about electrical currents and pulses, because it'll straight kill people.
Yeah, and I think there's something that happens at this scene that makes it pretty clear that I don't think the dock or the marina is really going to have any liability for this. Al Czervik actually runs over a buoy and illustrates, even though we don't see it word for word, that there was likely ample warning, no wake zone, to not do this type of behavior.
Yeah, it's unclear. I mean, it looks a little different than it looks like a channel buoy more than it looks like a no wake zone buoy, but they could have been using it for that, certainly. But I mean, the last, I think, injury, we don't really know what happens to any of the people in the water that get knocked off the pavilion, but there certainly could be additional injuries there, potential for electrocution, for example. So we don't know whether this is just the one death at the beginning, or 2 deaths with the guy, second fisherman, or there's like 10 people, and then Al Czervik is hustling to keep his money.
So when you go to Center Hill Lake, there's obviously really clearly marked things, right? There's no wake zones. There's buoys that tell you whether to go right or left. In this scene, we see some issues particularly with the jet skis and the boats, and that they were coming right at him. So he was probably, in addition to going too fast, in addition to causing wake issues, he was probably on the right side when he should have been on the left, and vice versa.
Yeah, they say they're at a yacht club there. He's driving the boats. It's like a sailboat sloop that probably has a smaller engine in it. And in this scene, if you look at the boats, most of the boats are sailboats. It's unclear. I mean, you don't really see a lot of marina, at least that part where they're christening that boat. But ultimately, Al Czervik or Rodney Dangerfield comes in, stops somewhat short of his boat, maybe bumps it a little bit, but then he drops his anchor into the middle of it, and that definitely sank that boat.
And I think this is a super important question. Al Czervik looks at Judge Smales and goes, "Hey, you scratched my anchor." I mean, does he have a good claim for that?
You scratched my anchor.
You scratched my anchor.
He absolutely does not.
No.
So you essentially have a guy who has what appears to be a professional, boat captain with his boat. Despite Judge Smales and him both having on the captain hats during this scene, they appear to be amateur boaters. He got rid of the guy who was hired to have his own party on the boat to drive it, and decided to do it himself, and then wreaked havoc all over the place. Outside the world of Caddyshack, but there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits from this deal.
There are, and this is actually a case where I would worry about, there's so much damage, particularly to boats and property and whatnot on the property damage side, that I would worry about there being ample coverage. Obviously, Al Czervik is portrayed as a very wealthy guy. It's a large boat, but Al Czervik's also a pretty reckless guy, and I could see him being the type that maybe didn't have the sufficient insurance.
Well, the marinas are going to require them to have some level of insurance, probably up to $1 million. Most commercial marinas are going to make you do that as a part of a function to get liability off themselves, because that marina's going to be worried that, well, that scene lasts like 2 minutes. Was there anybody at the marina trying to do anything about this during this? It's probably not enough time really for them to get involved. So it's likely all on Rodney Dangerfield, what insurance he has, what personal assets he has that aren't protected. There's personal assets you cannot go after. His condominium company or his construction company probably is a separate corporation. That has nothing. Who owns this boat? Does he own it? Does his business own it? There's some things that would have to be researched to figure that out.
Overall, who has the strongest case? Who has the most valuable case? Break down this case as a whole as an attorney.
I would most want, if our friend the fisherman, rest in peace, is not with us anymore, I still think that'd be a pretty good case. He's the first person injured. The rest of these people, even if you're on that pavilion, how do you not notice this crazy person driving their boat around at 30 or 40 miles an hour in a very congested area? Those are probably the second most cases that you want in this one. The Judge Smales case in this, probably the guy with the second fisherman and the rowboat looking thing. Those are probably property damage cases. I don't really see a lot where that guy didn't seem like he was injured. Judge Smales doesn't even leave the boat. He just looks unhappy about the fact that the water's bubbling out of the middle of his brand new boat.
Yeah, and I think Judge Smales would try to sell you really hard on like emotional damages and things of that nature. Like you ruined the presentation of his sailboat. The problem is, I don't know that a 12-person jury is going to be real endeared to Judge Smales.
Well, and there's two other things I'll say about Judge Smales. Number one, he hurt someone else at Bushwood during this movie when he got upset when he missed a putt, threw his putter, hit a lady in the head, and then to settle that case, he buys their lunch. When it feels like she's laying on the ground, like she might have a brain injury. So that's a potential case. So if he's got a history of this kind of thing, that doesn't really help him. The second thing I'll say is there's a callback to this damage to the boat later in the final scene when they, for reasons that make no sense to me, double the bet during a time period that even if Danny Noonan had made his final putt absent the explosion, it would just have been tied. It would have been a push. They double on the bet, a double off of one stroke. And at that point, Judge Smales says, I need exactly $20,000 worth of repairs to my boat. So it makes it seem like he's not made the claim against Rodney Dangerfield, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about the first part of that where Judge Smales threw his putter and hit someone in the head, and he tried to buy them lunch. Something that everybody needs to be really careful about in the real world is settlements as a whole. Accepting money and cashing a check can be deemed as an acceptance of a settlement, likely will be. Signing a release that you're settling a case can be deemed as an acceptance. When you have a car wreck or you get an injury as a result of negligence, insurance companies sometimes will offer you a really quick settlement. And you think it's them trying to take responsibility for what they're doing. What it usually is them trying to limit their liability. We've seen some sad stories of people who called here with cases that would have been worth a whole lot more than what they settled for, but the insurance company offered them something really quick. They cashed the check, they settled their case, and there was nothing that could be done about it from that point on. You need to be really, really careful about not accepting a quick settlement, because the reality is it takes a while to figure out what all your damages are, and quite frankly, I would recommend hiring an attorney to help you with that.
That's exactly right. And I think most folks think of insurance companies, they think of either their funny commercials, or B, their friendly insurance salesman who's they likely have some relationship with. That's all nice. Well, those aren't going to help you if you actually get injured at the fault of somebody else. It's a whole nother set of people. It's insurance adjusters who work for a different part of that company that are deciding what, if anything, that you're going to get. And those folks are incentivized to pay as little as possible or look for ways to pay nothing. So, having somebody on your side to fight for you is really important, and don't fall for that trap of, here's a tiny amount of money and you're done. So that'd be a real problem. But coming back to Judge Smales for a minute, Danny Noonan, his caddy, actually takes responsibility for that incident, indicating that he noticed that the grips on his putter were frayed, and that's why they slipped out of his hand. And he, in actuality, just chucked this club because he's mad that he missed it. So that implicates probably Bushwood with that, because they essentially, he's a club employee. At some level, I don't know how they do their caddy program there, if he's an employee or considered an independent contractor, but it appears he's an employee of some type. So you end up having Judge Smales and Bushwood would be involved with that potential brain injury that lady had.
If I was representing the club, I would make the argument that Danny Noonan works for tips. And so he says things that make Judge Smales want to like him and tip him more, just because he stated that this is the reason this happened. I mean, if you really look into it, you talk to witnesses, and we actually have cameras here. I mean, it's a movie. This probably wouldn't have had cameras live, but if you look at this, a reasonable juror would think that this was an intentional act.
I think one thing you're leaving out, though, Judge Smales has some heavy leadership job at Bushwood. I don't know if he's president of the club. He has his own office at the country club. I think what he says is going to go a long way to what they end up deciding doing, given that he has some kind of high up leadership position within the club. Those kind of clubs try to protect their own.
Overall, I would say we both think there's a case here. The stronger case is going to be the people who actually had physical injuries to themselves, as opposed to just the people who were kind of humiliated by being in the water. That's not to say that those claims don't have any value at all, but claims where medical bills result are often worth more than those types of claims.
I'd say almost always.
Almost always.
Let's move now into our irrelevant evidence portion of our podcast. We're going to talk about William's favorite golf courses, but before we do, let's talk about the condition of the Bushwood golf course. People that play golf and would have some commentary about this, what this course looked like in 1980. What do you think about that?
So I think it gets Bushwood is sometimes used to as in modern day as a reference to courses that aren't very well kept. That is the case to an extent, but I think that the timing is really more of an issue. This is 44 years ago, 1980, and I've seen, Augusta National is probably the most beautiful golf course in the country, and maybe Cypress Point. They were neck and neck, but I've seen some old photos of the famous number 12 par 3 at Augusta National, and it hasn't always looked like it does today. The reality is golf has a lot more money in it that's been influxed into it for many different reasons, mostly the popularity of the game. Also, these schools are teaching, taking care of grass maintenance. Those are majors at most schools, turf management. And so we as a society have advanced in that department quite a bit. So my guess is that if they used Bushwood today, that it would look much, much better.
Well, and this course at that time was actually a 27-hole golf course, based on some research I did on this. And, since I think starting, 10 years ago after that, they hired Raymond Floyd, who's a, famous golfer who still does golf design even now, to redo it. And they got it back down to an 18-hole course. They fixed the layup. They did major changes to it. It's now called Grand Oaks, Grande Oaks. I don't know if that's Grand or Grande. I don't know. Grande.
And I was particularly surprised when you told me that this course was in Florida. And they intentionally made it look like it was not in Florida. The movie's set in the Midwest.
Well, there's some reasons behind that. So Brian Doyle Murray, who's Bill Murray's brother, who wrote the script, he plays like the head of the Caddyshack in this movie. I think his name's Lou. And when he and Bill and his brothers were growing up, they worked as caddies at a golf course near Chicago, where they're all from Illinois. And this was a golf course they could find in Florida that did not have palm trees on it, so they could get more of that Midwest look that they were trying to get.
Well, it worked. And Bill Murray is one of my favorite actors, not just because he's a great actor, but because he is a diehard Chicago Cubs fan like myself.
And he's a good golfer on top of it.
He's a good golfer. He plays in the AT&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am every year. So for relevant evidence today, you gave me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics.
William is an avid golfer. He brought me to golf, which I appreciate. He was a college golfer, very, very high-level player. And one of the things Williams likes to do in his life is just keep lists of things. And one of the things he's kept lists for a very long time is the list of the rankings of every golf course he's ever played. And so I thought this would be a good time for him to be able to use one of his lists and tell you what his top 5 or 6 golf courses are.
Absolutely. The origin story of this is I was heading to a golf trip. I'm actually going to the same place. I'm going to Pinehurst this weekend. I'm very excited about it. And I was going on this golf trip, and I got on the plane, and there was no Wi-Fi, and my movies I didn't download, so I had an hour and a half to kill. And so I decided to make a list of the best golf courses I've ever played. So I'm going to share that list. I'm going to start from 5 and work my way up to 1, but I was not able to settle the difference on 5. So I had a tie at 5. One was Shoal Creek in Birmingham, Alabama, where the 1990 PGA Championship was played, won by Wayne Grady, I think. And then also Spyglass Hill, which is a famous course. It's in Monterey, California.
What did you like about those courses?
So Shoal Creek a lot of holes felt and looked like Augusta National, which is a pretty high praise. It's an old school golf course, but the water is beautiful, and it looked like it was the first place that I had played that looked like the courses I saw on TV. And to be able to do that and combine it with feeling like you're out in nature was really cool. So that was what stood out there. Spyglass Hill is one of the craziest course I've ever played because the first 5 holes use the Pacific coast and the Pacific Ocean, and they're super scenic and famous. And I actually I was 3 under through 5 there, and I ran the numbers, and from that point I was on pace to shoot 61.5, which would have beaten Phil Mickelson's course record of 62, and I only missed it by like 16 shots. But once you come inward on that golf course, it actually looks like it looks like a course like Augusta or Shoal Creek, and it just changes course immediately. It goes from this coast course to this beautiful inland course, and I loved the variety there. Also, there were like 10 stunning deer on the first hole, and I hit a sand wedge over the deer, and I was really conscious to not hit one thin because I didn't want to kill a deer, at least that way. And my fourth course is one that's personal to me. I'm actually playing there on Sunday. It's in North Carolina, and it's called Tobacco Road, and it was designed by Mike Strantz, who passed away in 1998. And really his goal with that golf course was to create one of the most unique, different golf courses that there is. And some people absolutely hate it. Some people
what's different about it?
The greens are enormous. They have massive slopes and mounds and whatnot. Almost every hole makes you maybe pick which fairway you're going to. They're massive bunkers. You even drive the cart through some bunkers, which is a crazy feel to it. There's actually no bunkers in theory. They're all waste areas, and you can test your club. The 11th hole, there's a bunker where I think it's something like 70 feet down into the ground. And so every hole has some visual thing that you've just never seen on a golf course. And I like seeing new and different experiences. I've always played well there. Best round of my life was there. And it was just,
don't ask him about it.
It's 65, but I've always played there with really, really, really close friends, and it is just it's provided me a lot of fun and happiness, and it's rated as one of the top 10 most fun golf courses in the world. I saw that on the list, and I think it is the most fun golf course I've ever played.
What's the next one?
Next one would be Whistling Straits in Wisconsin. I got the opportunity to do that a couple years ago. The awesome feature on Whistling Straits is that it hugs Lake Michigan. And so it's a little bit different than like being on the ocean or whatnot. The waves aren't necessarily crashing, but it certainly does bring wind, and wind changes the way you have to play. But to look out it's stunning. Greens are hanging over Lake Michigan. And the fairways are fairly large and the greens are fairly large, but if you miss them, you're in for it. But it was really, really beautiful. They've played 3 PGA championships there. And they've also played a Ryder Cup, the most recent one that America won there.
Well, as an aside, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, we went on a family trip to Lake Michigan in January. And I told my dad I wanted to be able to tell people that I'd swam in Lake Michigan. And my dad, to his great credit, we did it in January. It was like 30 degrees, 35 degrees.
I'm glad
we very briefly swam in Lake Michigan.
I'm glad you brought that up. In the PGA Championship in the mid-2000s, John Daly, this might have been mid-2010s, he threw a club into Lake Michigan in anger. And so I brought an old cheap putter and threw that putter and got a video of it from the exact same spot that he did that into Lake Michigan. And John Daly has actually seen that video. It's been sent to him through a buddy that knows him, and he thought it was pretty funny.
Were your grips worn out?
That was good. That grip was worn out, and I had about as much intent as Judge Smales did, which is 100%.
All right, what's your top 2?
All right, number 2, very famous course. You've played it on a video game. You've played it on a simulator. I was very fortunate to get to play it in real life. Pebble Beach. Absolutely stunning. As a golf course, I wouldn't necessarily want to play it every day. The greens are really, really small. There's actually a fun fact that all 9 greens on the front 9 can fit into the 18th green at St. Andrews. That's how small the greens are. But the stretch of 6, 7, 8, 9 is the most iconic stretch of golf holes that I've ever played in my life. 7 is the shortest par 3 on tour. It's like 91 yards, and it's directly on the Pacific Ocean, and the wind was so strong that I hit a club that I would typically hit 140 yards, and I still didn't get there. They've said they've seen pros hit 4-iron, which they would hit over 200 yards to this little 91-yard hole. So that's how much of an impact the wind plays. Next hole is hole 8. It's Jack Nicklaus's favorite approach in all of golf. Jordan Spieth famously hung over the cliff, and people were worried he might fall off as he hit his shot. So they've made some alterations and grown up some grass so that doesn't happen again. But it was unbelievable stretch, and then 18 is the most famous hole I've ever played. The waves are crashing against the wall, and there's a little tree that you aim out to, and I hit it right to that tree, and I left my birdie putt 2 inches short, and it's one of the biggest regrets of my life.
All right, what's number 1?
My favorite golf course is the Honors Course in Ottawa, Tennessee. There's definitely some sentimental value. My granddad was a member there, and we played the grandson, father-son tournament there every year growing up. It's just a special area. I'm a really, really proud Tennessean. I was particularly proud Tennessean a few weeks ago when the Big Orange Machine took it down the Alabama Crimson Tide 24-17.
Go Vols.
Spent some time on Shields Walking Fields after that one, and it was gorgeous. But the Honors is, by most accounts, the best golf course in Tennessee, and to me, it's the best golf course I've ever played. It provides every type of shot you could hit. There's a little bit of links golf with the tall grass and the pot bunkers, kind of a nod to like Scotland. There's awesome short par 4s. There's short par 3s that are kind of cut into the mountain. There's difficult holes with a lake on the left and the right. Every shot you could ever imagine, you can hit it at the Honors. It's had a U.S. Amateur. Tiger Woods won an NCAA championship there. He shot something like 68, 80, 69, so he really struggled one day. And at a time, I think the course had one of the highest slopes in all of America, so it's not an easy golf course.
Well, my understanding is I've not played there, but it caters to the amateur golfer as kind of a throwback to the early days of golf in the United States.
Absolutely. The Honors is actually named, it means honoring amateur golf. And so they've had some opportunities to have the PGA Championship there, but amateurs aren't allowed to play in that event. So they really cater to amateur golf, and it's not big and gaudy. If you're driving down the street, you have to kind of know where you're going to even notice the gate. There's like a oil tank on the right that's kind of the landmark for it, but they don't try to be something that they're not. It's just pure class, pure golf, and it was a wonderful time to spend with my granddad, who got me into the game. And even though he's no longer with us, I am going to tell you guys he shot his age 387 times, and he was very proud of that, and I was proud of it too. So that was really where I learned the game, and it is a special place to me.
I figure if I live long enough, I might someday shoot my age.
You're getting there, you know.
Fair enough. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us again for this edition of the Pop Culture Courtroom. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you've been involved in a car wreck or any other type of personal injury or wrongful death case, check us out at matthardinlaw.com or give us a call at 615-200-1111.